The top 10 moments of 2020, the return of Conor McGregor, and the fights we have to see in 2021. Welcome back to episode 2 of the Patrón Show. What's the crack, everyone? Welcome back to Patrón MMA, and before we get into the video, please subscribe. It lets me know that you're loving the content. In today's video, we've got a top 10 talking about the best moments of 2020, whether they be sad, funny, unbelievable, great knockouts. We're covering it all, as well as the return of Conor McGregor and another how the UFC should book. And finally, we're going to be talking about the fights that the UFC has to make in 2021. Let's get into it. Let's get right into the top 10 moments of 2020. Coming in at number 10 is Khamzat Chimaev having 2 fights in 10 days at Fight Island. Coming in and dominating absolutely everyone in his path. He even beat a Northern Irish fella, which hurt me a bit to my soul. But his impact in such a small period of time, he burst onto the scene and I just couldn't stop talking about him. Anyone who would listen to me, I was just telling them about him. He is amazing. At number 9, we have a shocking moment that was Henry Cejudo retiring. He was at the top of his powers. He was finally getting the recognition. Every media outlet was talking about him. He was at the top of the game. Like, he had conquered the flyweight division and the bantamweight division. He had the Olympic gold medal. He was Triple C. The media couldn't stop talking about him. I loved him personally. I loved the whole King of Cringe thing, and I was upset whenever he retired. It was a real shocking moment. The reason I think he retired, though, is that I reckon he knew he had to defend that title. There was no moving between weight divisions, and he wanted to fight Volkanovski for that 145. He wanted to be 3 UFC championship belts with the Olympic medal. He wanted to be C4, which would have been one of the best nicknames in the sport. Coming in at number 8, we have Justin Gaethje beating the brakes off Tony Ferguson. Nobody expected this to happen. Justin Gaethje put on an absolute masterclass against Tony Ferguson. He made him look old, he made him look slow, he made him look like he actually had no punching power. Justin Gaethje was an animal in this fight and just picked Tony Ferguson apart. You could hear the surprise in the commentator's voice, because round on round on round, they just kept saying how Tony Ferguson is going to get back into it. He's eating these shots, his cardio's not being affected. They genuinely were like, oh, Tony's just going to come into this at some point. But Justin Gaethje just put a beating on him, put on an absolute masterclass, and it's a rightful number 8 in the top 10 moments. In at number 7, we have Anderson Silva finally retiring from the UFC. Such an emotional moment. After being finished by Uriah Hall was crying, saying that he was sorry and he was his hero. The commentators were getting choked up. Everyone was just in such a state. It was such an emotional moment and a good send-off for one of the greatest MMA fighters of all time. I don't think this is him done. I reckon he'll go to another organisation. But what a way to put an end to his UFC career. I know it wasn't in front of all the fans, but it was just such a beautiful moment and a perfect send-off for the Spider. In at number 6, we have Mike Perry coming into a fight with just one person in his corner, and that being his girlfriend, who has no experience and doesn't have a clue what she was doing. Everyone loved it, and what made it better was in between rounds when you could hear them talking to each other. He was saying, oh babe, you're looking good. She was saying, oh, you're doing well. Like, they just... it was just so stupid and so weird, but it was Mike Perry summed up. And what made it even better was he went out and beat him. And the funny thing is, like, you would see Mickey Gall and he's got 4 or 5 coaches around him telling him what to do, and cuts back to Perry and he's just sitting there with his girlfriend. It was so funny. It blew up and it really summed up Mike Perry. He's an absolute, he's a rocket, like. Coming in at number 5 is Israel Adesanya absolutely dominating Paulo Costa. For months this had been built up to be the big fight at 185. I believe it was the first time it was an undefeated fighter versus an undefeated fighter for the UFC championship. A lot of people bet against Izzy. A lot of people thought that Paulo Costa was just going to run through him, was just going to erase him, but it just didn't happen. It was a weird fight. It was a masterclass by Adesanya, but Costa just didn't throw anything. It really wasn't like him. I reckon Adesanya got in his head. Plus, whenever the leg kick started adding up, he really started to get a bit of fear in his mind. But what made the whole thing better was after Adesanya finished him, when he's curled up in a ball, he just gets on top of him and starts humping him. It just was... it was just so disrespectful and unnecessary, but that's perfect Izzy for you, like. In at number 4 we have Weili Zhang beating Joanna Jędrzejczyk in the fight of the year 5-round war. The fight was so back and forth. Most rounds you couldn't even tell who was winning because one person was hitting, the other person was hitting, combo. It was ridiculous. It was class mixed martial arts and high level striking at its absolute finest. It was an unbelievable scrap and absolutely worthy of fight of the year. It's probably the best fight that I've ever seen. Okay, so before we get into the top 3, I want to give out some honourable mentions. Firstly, we've got Yoel Romero versus Izzy's dance-off. Whenever they squared off, Izzy started doing a bit of the salsa and Yoel Romero just pulled out a backflip into a split in a pair of jeans. He's a freak of nature, and it was so funny. Also, we've got Kute Laba, who was pretending to be rocked, was pretending to be dazed so that he could lure his opponent in and throw bombs, but the referee stepped in because he thought he was hurt. I thought it was a bit of a stupid strategy at the time because it cost him the fight, but when you see what actually happened in their rematch, it was a pretty smart move. And finally, we got to see Darren Till come alive on Twitter. During lockdown, during the pandemic, he kept everyone so entertained with his tweets. His beef with Perry that sent him on the downward spiral, making a brand out of his Raw Dog tweet. He just had an unbelievable 2020, even though he fought once. His star grew so much over 2020, and he's now genuinely one of the top stars in the sport, having only fought once in the year. Okay, so in at number 3 is Joaquin Buckley's knockout of the year. It's probably the best knockout I've ever seen. It was crazy. The commentators, no one could believe it. It blew up. It's probably the most viral thing to come out of 2020. His star grew massively, and it was just a crazy KO. Okay, so in at number 2, we have the return of Conor McGregor. McGregor coming back to face Cerrone was just mega. Everything about a Conor McGregor fight is special. It just feels bigger. We had Usman versus Masvidal this year, and that felt like a big fight, but there's just something different about a McGregor fight. There's just something special about it. With a quick knockout, using his shoulder to break his nose, having quotables in all his interview, it just felt like the return of Conor McGregor, and him saying he was going to have that season just made everything feel so much more special. That was definitely my number 2. Okay, so in at number 1, we have one of the most special moments that the sport has ever seen. Khabib Nurmagomedov crying in the middle of the octagon at the death of his father was just something special in itself. I said that everyone was upset when Anderson Silva left, but this was a different kind of sadness. This wasn't a happy sad moment that Silva had, like a fulfilled career. This was a sad moment of a man crying at the loss of his father and his coach. It was a genuinely heartbreaking moment, and one that went out of MMA. Every sportsman, every person in the world felt his pain. It was an unbelievable moment, and definitely my number 1 moment of 2020. How the UFC should book is a segment where I take a topic within the sport at the moment and tell you how the UFC should book it to get the most excitement and the best fights possible. So today I'm going to talk about how the UFC should book the return of Conor McGregor. Now, he's scheduled to fight Dustin Poirier at the end of the month, and it's not looking like it's going to be for a title. So I'm going to tell you how McGregor's going to get back to the title and what moves he's going to make after it. So I think in a lot of people's minds, McGregor's the number 2 lightweight in the world. So a win over Dustin Poirier by a first or second round knockout puts him right back in there. He'll get the next title shot, whether it's against Khabib or someone else. McGregor's the man. After he beats Poirier, it's all down to what Khabib does next, whether he retires or comes back to fight. But I just don't think if McGregor wins, it's going to be against McGregor. I genuinely think Khabib will relinquish that 155 title. And like I made in the previous video, I genuinely do think that a 165 fight between Khabib and GSP is in the works and could really potentially happen. So if Khabib goes and fights GSP, he'll relinquish the 155 title, and that means that the next fight McGregor has will be for that title. And who better for him to fight than Justin Gaethje? Justin Gaethje's style is crazy. Them two could either have a war like he had against Diaz, or it's a good stylistic matchup for McGregor. Neither of them are going for takedowns. Gaethje's easy to bring into a war, and McGregor's just too slick for him. I reckon that's another win for him. He gets back that 155 title, and he's the king of that division again. Now, on the same card as McGregor-Poirier, it's Dan Hooker versus Michael Chandler. I genuinely think there's something sneaky in what Dana's done, in the same way he did it to Ben Askren. I remember when Ben Askren said Dana's going to sit back and laugh in years to come at how he gave Ben Askren all his losses. I think Dana's got the same thing in mind for Chandler. Chandler's not unbeatable. He wasn't the title holder at Bellator, but when his contract ran out, he came out on a good win. But the thing that makes him stand out is that he's Bellator's star boy. He's been the face of their promotion for years. He's the most successful champion, and Dana White would love it to bring him into the UFC and give him 3 losses, bang, 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 just to show how much superior the UFC is than Bellator. and that's why he's giving them Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker is a nightmare matchup for anyone, and Michael Chandler really has a tough fight coming in. So I don't think the winner of that fight's going for a title shot next. I think they have to have one more fight, and that'll end up being Oliveira. So I'm looking at this like the season McGregor said he was going to have. He's going to fight in January against Poirier, he's going to fight mid-year against Gaethje, and then for his third fight I think he'll have to fight Oliveira. I don't think Dan Hooker or Michael Chandler are better than him. He's a nightmare matchup, but if McGregor beats Oliveira, his star is just as high as it's ever been. With 2 title defences of the division, people can't criticise him anymore for saying he has no title defences and things like that. He really is back on top, and he's in a great position going into 2022. Now this is where it gets interesting. He's back on top, he's defended his belts, he's wiped out that division for the time being. Now what does he do? The first option, which I think is the most ideal for him and the UFC, is to create that 165 division and for him to be the marquee fight to bring the title in. Now depending on how other results go throughout the year, I think the title fight should be McGregor versus Masvidal. It would be an unbelievable fight. The hype would be incredible around it. They're the 2 biggest stars in the sport at the moment, and the pay-per-view numbers they would sell would be incredible. It would be so easy for the UFC to give Diaz a favourable matchup, try to get him an easy win, and make him the #1 contender for the 165 division. This is the perfect setup because at this point I don't think McGregor has many more fights in him. He's defended the 155, he's going to defend the 165, and what better way to do it than to finish the trilogy, beat Diaz, get the 2-1 over him, defend the 165 title, and go out on the top of the sport. It's McGregor and the UFC's perfect outcome. Now the second option is more of a money grab spectacle. It's McGregor going into boxing. In January of 2019 he spoke to Helwani saying that the Pacquiao fight was near done. I reckon the UFC could so easily get that booked. Now the trash talk wouldn't be as good as the Mayweather fight, but the world tour and the promotion and just everything around it would be so special, especially coming out of a terrible 2020 and probably a COVID-ridden 2021. This is the sort of mega event that the world needs. This will be a huge fight because McGregor's star is back, Pacquiao's a huge name, and it's what the world needs. Everyone's fiending for an event like this, and 2022 is the year to deliver this. Hopefully the first year without any COVID problems. The world will need it. Now the final option is for McGregor to move to 170 and fight the reigning champion, who I think will be Usman. I just don't think that Usman's going to get beat by anyone. His style and his wrestling and his strength and his pressure, they're just too much for a lot of people in the sport. So for McGregor to move up, I just think it might be too much. I think McGregor's overall skill set between his striking and his grappling and his distance control is better than Usman's, but it's just the size that's a problem. Stylistically, McGregor matches up well with a lot of fighters in higher weight classes, but if he was to fight Adesanya, he's just too small. It's the same with Usman. Obviously it's not as big a difference, but I just think Usman's too big. He's so strong, his wrestling is so good. It really would be a tough matchup for McGregor, and one that I don't think he would want his last fight to be. So I'm going to say in 2022 the UFC should book that 165 division. Now it's Conor McGregor, you never know what he's going to do. He might retire in the morning, he might wake up and say that he wants to fight in 6 days. You just never know what he's going to do. I don't see McGregor as having a career up until he's 40. I think we've maybe got 4 or 5 fights left in him. So if 2021 is going to be an active year, 2022 the UFC needs to book big fights, mega fights, maximise the cash they can out of him, and having him fight Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz in the 1 year is exactly how the UFC should book the return and the retirement of Conor McGregor. So in this last segment we're going to be talking about fights that are high level, that are fun, that are pay-per-view blockbusters, that have KOs guaranteed, just every form of fight that we need to see in 2021. First fight is Rose Namajunas versus Weili Zhang. Both are such high level fighters. Weili Zhang has just come off the fight of the year, and Rose Namajunas came off 2 great fights with Joanna and had a really good fight with Jessica Andrade. They're both such high level strikers. They match up fantastically against each other, and it would be an absolute blockbuster. It would be 5 rounds of pure carnage. Now the only problem this fight faces is the fact that Rose didn't like being champion, so Dana White's going to have to do a lot of convincing to get it going, but I genuinely think this could be a fight of the year contender again for Weili. Another fight I would love to see is Jon Jones versus Ngannou. Now the reason it's not Jones versus Stipe is because Stipe had a couple of close fights with DC. Genuinely I just think that Jones is a higher level than him. I think Jones would go up and he would take the belt, he would beat Stipe. It wouldn't be an easy fight, but it's not the fight I want to see. I want to see Ngannou go out and knock him out. I do not like Jon Jones, and I want the Ngannou who came out against Overeem. I want the man who comes out to take people's heads off, doesn't think about wrestling, just pure striking, go out, uppercut. I want him to take Jones's head off his shoulders, out of the arena. I want Ngannou to knock Jon Jones out. Another fight I would love to see, but I just don't think it's going to happen, is Khabib versus McGregor 2. If McGregor comes out here in January and beats Poirier, it's the fight that makes the most sense in terms of the lightweight division. But Khabib has pure hatred towards him, out of honour for his family and out of the disrespect that McGregor gave him. I genuinely don't think Khabib for any amount of money would fight McGregor again. It's one that I'm just not sure could happen, but genuinely I would love to see it. I genuinely think that the McGregor who showed up against Alvarez was special, and if he shows up against Khabib, Khabib has all sorts of problems. A motivated McGregor versus a determined Khabib will be one of the greatest fights in UFC history. Staying on Khabib, my previous video was about Khabib versus GSP. That fight has to happen. Surely his final fight, his 30-0 fight, should be against GSP. They both want to fight each other. It just makes sense. Do it at a catchweight. It doesn't need to be for a title or anything, but just let the fans know what the outcome of that fight would be. It's like GSP versus Silva. It'll be one of the fights we never got. Silva versus Jones. We need to have that fight. Could Khabib beat GSP? Could GSP beat Khabib? It would be the first time ever in the promotion's history where they can promote something as the GOAT versus the GOAT. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity promotion and something that just needs to happen. Apart from McGregor, Valentina Shevchenko is my favourite fighter in the UFC. She's a dominant champion. Her wrestling's crazy. Her stand-up is so crisp, throwing axe kicks, spin kicks, spinning elbows. Her skill set is so well rounded. She's an absolute killer. I love her. And she's had 2 extremely close fights with Amanda Nunes. And since their fights, Valentina's gone on to solidify herself as one of the most dominant champions in the UFC's history. And Amanda Nunes has done the same. She's gone on to become a champ and just tear through everyone in her way. They're both absolute forces in nature, and after having such close fights both times, with a lot of people thinking Valentina got robbed the second time, a third fight needs to happen. And the thing is, if Valentina wins, a 4th fight could happen, a 5th fight. These 2 could fight every week and they would all be instant classics. Valentina versus Nunes has to happen this year. And finally, the biggest grudge match in recent UFC history has to happen. Colby versus Masvidal. They have to make that for 2021. Colby Covington is my guilty pleasure fighter. I'll hold my hands up. I love him. His trash talking, the way he builds fights, the way he gives people shit, his Instagram videos with all the girls in bikinis, him wearing the MAGA hat, his Trump stick. I just love it all. I think he's done such a good job of rebranding himself and making himself relevant, as well as the fact that there's genuine heat in this fight. Colby and Masvidal hate each other. The beef is real. They do not like each other. They can't be in the same room together. They were former teammates, former roommates, former best friends, and they've turned on each other. They hate each other. And so whenever a fight like that occurs, you really feel the tension. There's more to it. It's not just 2 people stepping into a cage. There's emotion in it. There's hatred in it, and it's what I love to see in a fight. Colby versus Masvidal and the build up to it is probably the fight I'm most looking forward to in 2021. Thank you for watching episode 2 of the Patrón Show. Leave a like if you liked the video. Comment with anything you'd like to see on the show or the channel. Subscribe if you're new, and share it with anyone who you know loves MMA. Cheers.